Beyond the Bony Labyrinth. Podcast on music and philosophy by Lodewijk Muns. Episode 12, Music Remembered in Music 2, Sentiment and Soundscape around 1900. Music is inextricably linked to memory. But saying that is not to say much. We cannot do anything, not accomplish any task, we have no coherent perception without memory being involved. But music is sound structured in time, some say is structured time, but that is a meaningless abstraction. Music is first and foremost structured sound, and sound is a process that, like any process, occurs in time. And an essential aspect of its structure is a constant play with memory and expectation, knowing what came before and anticipating what might come next. One element is in most music fairly predictable, the regularity of a recurring beat, meter. Given a beat, you know when the next should come. Most of what happens in music is less predictable than meter, although there are recurring patterns. Playing with the listener's memory and expectation includes the recurrence of such musical objects as themes and phrases, or, for instance, the chorus of a song. What we call musical form is largely determined by more or less predictable repetition. Once we recognize the form, we listen with a degree of foreknowledge. It is different when recurrence is completely unexpected. For instance, when a theme recurs in another movement of the same work or in another composition. We may then feel challenged to find an explanation. Why this musical idea here? I mentioned in episode 8 the original ending of Schumann's C major Fantasie. It is an interesting example precisely because it was erased by the composer. It is a seemingly unmotivated reminder of the nearly identical ending of the first movement. One way to make sense of this is as an act of recall. It is recalled by the listener, evidently, but that doesn't explain why it should occur in the music. However, this act of recall can be projected onto the piece itself, as if it were the thought process of a human being. Schumann himself may have found his break with formal coherence too abrupt, too subjective, and therefore cancelled it. But a question raised by the original ending is whether music can somehow represent the process of recollection. How it occurs in a mental process, a train of thought, a soliloquy, or a stream of consciousness. That was a topic of the previous episode. As classical music has evolved during the past 3 or 4 centuries, it is not merely a game with each individual's memory, but also with collective memory, with the shared knowledge of an ever-growing repertoire. Music that contains reflections of music that came before. This tendency was very pronounced around 1900, Mahler's symphonies are the most obvious example. In the 1970s to 90s too, a lot of music had a retrospective character. Retrospective qualities are not exclusive to classical concert music. Around 1900 there was a fashion for popular songs that are about songs and about making music. This has been recognized as a feature of American popular music. Whether it applies to Europe, I don't know. I will present first a few straightforward cases of songs that incorporate well-known tunes that the audience is assumed to know. In that sense it is music remembered in music, but not necessarily a representation of the process of remembering. Then I will turn to the more complex case of Charles Ives' works from the same period, the early 1900s.
Honey, listen to that dreamy tune they're playing. Won't you tell me how on earth you keep from swaying? Oh, that Mendelssohn spring song, tune. If you ever love me, show me now or never. Lord, I wish they'd play that music on forever. Oh, that Mendelssohn tune. Oh, that Mendelssohn tune.
A famous, notorious case of a song that incorporates a familiar tune is that Mesmerizing Mendelssohn tune from 1909. It is one of Irving Berlin's early successes. The Mendelssohn tune referred to is the so-called spring song or Frühlingslied, one of the most popular of the songs without words, but maybe also the most detested. It may count as an emblem of Biedermeier bourgeois culture around 1900, when there was hardly a middle-class household without a piano and a son or daughter more or less miserably rattling off its incessant arpeggios. My own initiation in music still was within this bourgeois or petit bourgeois tradition, and I remember practicing it from a pedagogical collection of pieces titled Stimmen der Meister. The Frühlingslied is still found nowadays in such commercial hit lists as 50 Best Piano, Classical Dining, Classic Goes Meditation, Coffee and Chill, Heart is Purified Beautiful Classical Piano 8, and Classical Music for Weary Life 17, to name but a few from the Spotify inventory. I try to give it a go and put prejudice aside. That should be enough. It is the socio-cultural connotations, as much as its musical qualities, that make this piece a target for parody. In Berlin's song, only its first 4 bars are quoted or recalled in the chorus to the text, "Love me to that ever-lovin' spring-song melody, that's the only music that was ever meant for me." After that, it gives way to bumpy ragtime syncopations.
Kiss me like you would you, mother. One good kiss is ain't another. That's the only music that was ever meant for me. That tantalizing, hypnotizing, mesmerizing Mendelssohn tune.
It is a curious case of instrumental music that is not only given a text, but a text that refers to the tune itself. The music therefore does a kind of double duty. It is both signifier and signified, the vehicle for the text, but at the same time what the text refers to. Or, in the terms that are used in episode 7 on quotation, it is both used and mentioned. What becomes quite clear in this 1910 recording by vocal comedians Collins and Harlan is that the target of its parody is not so much classical music or bourgeois musical culture, but above all racial stereotypes. This is already implied musically in the ragtime syncopations and also hinted at by textual elements such as the dropped G, play-in, indicative of black speech. There is also the stereotype of the black man's uninhibited physical response, swaying to classical music that has little danceable qualities. And finally, there's the woman's misunderstanding of the man's pretentious use of upper-class words in a spoken dialogue that was added by these white male comedians.
Sam, I certainly am inspirated over that meddlesome music.
What kind of music did you say, honey?
Meddlesome.
No, not meddlesome.
Well then, what is it?
Why, Mendelssohn.
Oh, what did I say?
Why, you said meddlesome.
Did I say that? Why, how phantasmagorious.
This kind of humor based on ideas of race is no longer funny. A bit less painful it may be when Germans are ridiculed, but the humor is hardly more effective. This applies to another song that refers to Mendelssohn's Spring Song, Herman, Let's Dance That Beautiful Waltz, from around 1910. The lyrics are again by Irving Berlin, with music by his business partner Ted Snyder. The irresistible effect of Mendelssohn's music this time is erotic. I heard that a coon who heard Mendelssohn's tune kissed the first man she saw, if it's true. That very same feeling I feel on me stealing, and Herman, I'm looking at you. The I in this song is a Miss Lena Grausmeier with hair red as fire, who despises contemporary dances but is irresistibly urged to robust kissing by hearing a waltz. Mendelssohn's music, not waltz-like, is referred to in the lyrics but not quoted in the music. Instead, the chorus borrows from the waltz in Gounod's Faust. Another song that associates a well-known tune with kissing is not parodistic but unabashedly sentimental. The Song That Stole My Heart Away dates from 1913 and was written by Harry von Tilzer and Andrew B. Sterling. The song referred to in the title is a sentimental ballad from the 1840s titled Ben Bolt.
Oh, don't you remember sweet Alice Ben Bolt, sweet Alice with hair so brown? She wept with delight when you gave her a smile, and trembled with fear at your frown.
That is Ben Bolt, which is all about remembrance. Of one sweet Alice who lies under a slab of granite so grey, along with all other schoolmates, except this Ben Bolt, a friend to whom each stanza is addressed. The Song That Stole My Heart Away is a case of remembrance squared. It is the memory of a beloved person addressed as you, who was singing Ben Bolt one night in June in the long ago. You gave your first love kiss to me when all the roses bloom. I hear that melody, just play that sweet old tune once more for me. A literal quotation of Ben Bolt, music and lyrics, concludes the song.
Play that melody
Ben Bolt's Graveyard Musings may be an odd prompter for a first love kiss. But evidently the association of first love with a sentimental song was a strong enough cliché to ignore what that song is actually about. It is yet another instance of the phenomenon which I discussed in episode 2 and have come back to several times, the darling, they're playing our tune scenario, the reliving of fond feelings through a tune associated with it. Most of the oeuvre of Charles Ives was created in the same period as these popular songs, the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Ives is maybe the most outstanding example of a composer who creates music with music, as a kind of metamusic, integrating diverse sources, popular songs, church music, marches and dance music, and European classical music. Ben Bolt, for instance, figures, with many other musical relics, in A Central Park in the Dark, to which I will come back later. All this is remembered music, and sometimes it sounds as such. An early work, Memories for Voice and Piano, dates from 1897. It consists of 2 short songs to its own text, very pleasant and rather sad. The latter I just let you hear on the piano. The first is an evocation of a child's visit to the theatre and its anticipation before the curtain rises. "Oh, Jimmy, look," I say, "the band is tuning up and soon will start to play." It is sung and whistled oddly to operetta music, the kind of music that you may expect when the curtain rises. You might call it a case of music anticipated in music.
We're sitting in the opera house, waiting for the curtain to arise. As well as our eyes are feeling pretty gay and well the May. Jimmy, look, I say the band is tuning up and soon we'll start to play. We whistle, we howl, pay your time with the drum. We whistle, we howl, pay your time with the drum. We're sitting in the opera house, waiting for the curtain to arise. As well as our eyes are feeling for expectancy, a certain kind of ecstasy, expectancy, and ecstasy.
The second of this song pair involves a case of involuntary memory, prompted by the chance hearing of a familiar song on the street. It is not a first love that is associated with this tune, but the poet's old uncle, who used to hum that same tune as he shuffled along on his way to the barn or to the town. the final word of this song, a humming, protracted over 4 bars, effectively comes to designate itself. The same goes probably for the song as a whole. The melody of the song is presumably identical with the tune that is heard from the street. What Ives does here is similar to the contemporary fashion of quoting songs in songs. But it is not, strictly speaking, music that is quoted. The tune is indistinguishable from the parlor music of the age, but it seems to have had no previous existence. It still functions as an object of reference. We may therefore consider it a kind of imaginary, sourceless quotation. The words "that red shawl," by the way, in a tune as threadbare as "that old red shawl," do refer to an existing song, "My Mother's Old Red Shawl." It is another memory-obsessed, folkish sentimental ballad, dating back only to 1885. In the lyrics, the garment in question is all that is left for this heart to adore, to bring to mind those happy days of yore. How gladly I'd flee from the world's bitter thrall, to seek the heart that throbbed beneath the shawl.
It now lies on the shelf, it is faded and torn, that dear old shawl my mother wore is all that is left for this heart to adore, to bring to mind those happy days of yore.
Ives' rather sad memory does not differ musically from other nostalgic ballads. In his more complex orchestra pieces, it may seem as if it is not just the tunes he uses, or even the style in which they are written, that are revived. It is rather the tonal system itself, the basic musical material, that sounds like something from the past. In this he was an early explorer of one of the paths of musical modernism. Ben Bolt figures, among other tunes, in the orchestra piece Central Park in the Dark, which is, according to the composer's description, the evocation of what one would have heard when sitting on a bench in New York's Central Park on a hot summer night. It is a kind of auditory landscape, as it was in the good old days, before the combustion engine and radio monopolized the earth and air. There may be no radio or engine sound in the piece, but there is just as much noise from other sources. Over a continuous dim background of strings, you gradually hear more and more snatches of different kinds of music. Ives gives a list of the various sorts of sounds, musical and non-musical, without any specific musical titles: people singing and whistling, a street parade, newspaper boys shouting, pianolas having a ragtime war, a fire engine, a horse that runs away. Some of the music is more precisely identifiable. The first thing you hear above the strings in the clarinet's low register is a snippet from Ben Bolt. It will return at the end of the piece. The pianola war features very obsessively the ragtime "Hello, My Baby." That is "Hello, My Baby" on player piano. This is how it first appears in Central Park in the Dark. The overlay of noises becomes increasingly complex and its tempo increases. The strings, meanwhile, continue to play at the same tempo. How exactly that will coincide is unpredictable and cannot be indicated exactly in the score. but since the strings always play the same ostinato, it doesn't really matter. Rather suddenly, this overlay builds a climax. According to the program note, a streetcar and a street band join in the chorus, a fire engine, a cab horse runs away. Then follows a sudden implosion, after which only the strings ostinato remains. The darkness is heard, an echo over the pond, and we walk home. Thus the composer's note. Ives' Good Old Days suggests a nostalgic picture, but in its compositional technique, with its high level of dissonance and independent layers of sound, this is a radically modern work. But is it also a case of music remembered in music? It is primarily what Ives calls a picture in sounds, that is, a picture of sounds which itself is sound. A kind of soundscape, but a musicalized and fictionalized one. Music that sounds within this fictionalized soundscape is primarily sound, rather than specifically music. Ives does not really quote Ben Bolt or Hello My Baby, since they do not function as musically meaningful in their own right. They merge with other sounds from the environment. The boundaries between musical and non-musical sound are blurred. In this picture in sounds, the 10-bar ostinato of the strings represents night sounds and silent darkness, according to the composer's paradoxical description. The ostinato provides a background, but also a frame that is part of the picture. It seems above all a translation of such concepts as darkness and dimness into musical sound. Multi-voiced chords in a slightly varying, irregular rhythm. The question still stands, is this the depiction of an actual soundscape, or rather that of a soundscape as it is remembered? Ives' program note seems to suggest that the picture is that of a scene recalled. This piece purports to be a picture in sounds of the sounds of nature and of happenings that man would have heard some 30 or so years ago, before the combustion engine and the radio monopolized the earth and air, when sitting on a bench in Central Park on a hot summer night. But this description carries no date and seems to have been written much later than 1906, the year of composition. Given that there was yet little motorized traffic in the early 1900s and no radio broadcasting, it is most likely that what the piece paints is a contemporary scene. Still, it may be tempting to think that the darkness and dimness which frames it may also represent the blurriness of memory. Memory which is more strongly revived in darkness than in broad daylight. Some of Ives' other musical soundscapes clearly relate to the past as he remembered it from childhood. His technique of musical collage has been said to reflect the way memory works, a process of association between blurred, distorted melodies. According to Peter Burkholder's study of Ives, All Made of Tunes, The result is a collage of half-heard and half-remembered tunes that is a wonderfully true musical evocation of the way human memory works. Thus Peter Burkholder. The direct reference here is to The 4th of July, the third movement of the Holidays Symphony, which was finished some 6 years after Central Park. It is an exuberant and noisy piece that to my ear does not sound like memory. It sounds present rather than distance, outside rather than inside oneself. For Ives, it seems to have been primarily a matter of reviving a particular childhood feeling of excitement in the act of composition. The tunes he uses are materials used in a musical artifice rather than an evocation of spontaneous recollection. In his memos he states, "I remember distinctly when I was scoring this, that was a feeling of freedom as a boy has on the 4th of July, who wants to do anything he wants to do, and that's his one day to do it. And I wrote this, feeling free to remember local things, etc., and to put in as many feelings and rhythms as I wanted to put together." That putting together is one characteristic principle that the 4th of July has in common with Central Park in the Dark and other of his works. A second principle is that of a climax leading up to a culmination or catastrophe, which ends abruptly with a kind of implosion. That may be appropriate for the fireworks of the 4th of July, but you may wonder why there should be such a noisy, catastrophic, and rather banal climax in Central Park. To my feeling it is too anecdotical in the context of this piece. It sacrifices the continuous nature of the soundscape for the singular event. A related problem that Central Park poses is that the background darkness is supposed to be spatially close to and envelop the listener, while the overlay of noises should be distant. But it doesn't really sound that way in recordings or the concert hall. It may be interesting to compare this handling of foreground and background with the last movement of Ravel's Valse Noble et Sentimentale, written a few years later. I discuss it in episodes 5 and 6. There we find a similar technique, but in a more traditional vein. Snippets of music are presented over a pedal point, a stable bass note, coupled with a recurring phrase. Together they have a function similar to Ives' ostinato. Ravel does this in a more traditional and coherent way, but it is still a process of quasi-random fragmentation and combination. One may interpret this fragmentation either as an acoustic effect, as if the music were carried by the wind or sounded through half-open doors and windows, or as a process of involuntary recollection, a somewhat random flow of associations. I doubt that either Ives or Ravel paints a realistic picture of the process of recollection or intended to do so. But there is a certain affinity between their treatment of musical ideas and the concept of stream of consciousness as it has become established in literary fiction around the same date in the early 20th century. They may capture something of the process of recollection and association, though hardly in a realistic way. But literary fiction too, though it more obviously relates to concrete things and real events, is rarely if ever true to life. I will conclude with another early song by Ives, dating back to his student days, one that allows me to reconnect with the beginning of my story, as the title is Frühlingslied. The German text is by Heinrich Heine. Ives later published this song, almost unchanged, but oddly with a text by Wordsworth. Since Ives apparently had a flexible view of the relationship between text and music, I feel free to transform this song into a song without words. This was episode 12 of Beyond the Bony Labyrinth.